The suitcase on my bed was only half full, but my heart was already gone. My name is Claire. I was 31 years old, married for 6 years, and on that afternoon, I was folding my clothes with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Not from sadness, from rage. 3 days earlier, I found a message on my husband's phone. A message from a woman named Dana. A message that used words like last night and can't wait to see you again. 3 days of pretending I didn't know. 3 days of smiling at dinner, asking him how his day was, watching him lie to my face without even blinking. That afternoon, I stopped pretending. I had decided. I was leaving. Not with a fight, not with a scene, just quietly while he was still at work, so I wouldn't have to look at him one more time and feel that twist in my stomach. I told myself I'd be gone before he even noticed. I want you to understand something about me before this story continues. I am not a woman who explodes. I am a woman who plans. When I get hurt, I go quiet, and that quiet is more dangerous than any shouting match could ever be. My husband, Mark, never understood that about me. He thought my silence meant I had accepted things. He was wrong. So there I was, folding sweaters into a suitcase, when I heard it. The front door. The key turning in the lock. He was home early. 3 hours early. And the very last thing I wanted, after 3 days of swallowing my anger, was to stand in that bedroom and explain myself before I was ready. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Not yet. Not until I had a plan. So I did something almost instinctive. I grabbed my phone, slipped my feet into sandals, and moved toward the sliding door that led to the backyard. I figured I'd wait outside for a few minutes, gather myself, and walk back and like nothing was wrong, buying myself time to think clearly instead of reacting in the heat of the moment. I had one hand on the door handle when I heard voices. 2 voices. Mark's and someone else's. A woman's voice. My whole body went still. It wasn't a voice I expected. It wasn't the playful, syrupy tone I had imagined from those text messages. This voice was sharp, controlled, almost cold. And then she said something that made my blood turn to ice. Mark, we need to talk about Claire. She can't find out what we did. Not yet. I stood frozen behind that glass door, my hand still on the handle, my heart pounding so loud I thought they might hear it through the walls. Because the voice didn't belong to Dana. It belonged to my own sister. Section 2. The voice I never expected. For a moment, I genuinely thought I had misheard. My sister, Renee, was supposed to be 3 hours away at her own home, with her own husband, living her own life. She had no reason, none, to be standing in my living room with my cheating husband. But there she was. I could see her shape through the curtain of the glass door. Arms crossed. Voice low, urgent, the way people speak when they are trying not to be heard by anyone but each other. I didn't move. I didn't breathe properly. Every instinct told me to stay exactly where I was and listen. She already suspects something, Mark said. His voice had that nervous edge I knew so well. The same tone he used when he forgot an anniversary or scratched the car and hadn't told me yet. She doesn't know about the money, Renee said. If she did, she would have said something already. Claire isn't the type to stay quiet. The money. Those 2 words hit me harder than the affair itself. Because in that moment, I understood that what I thought was a story about betrayal in my marriage was actually something much bigger and much darker. You see, a year earlier, our mother passed away and left behind a small inheritance, not a fortune, but enough to matter. Enough to buy a house outright or start a business or build a real future. The inheritance was supposed to be split between Renee and me equally, as our mother had clearly written in her will. But for months, Renee had been telling me that the inheritance was still being processed by the lawyers. She said the estate was complicated. She said it would take time. I trusted her because she was my sister and because grief makes you trust the people closest to you even more than you should. Standing behind that door, I began to understand the truth. There had been no delay. There had been a plan. If she finds out you transferred her half into your account, Mark said, she's going to go to a lawyer. She's going to destroy both of us. My stomach dropped to the floor. Her half. Transferred. Into Renee's account. With my husband's help. I pressed my back against the wall beside the door, trying to process what I was hearing. My husband wasn't only cheating with some woman named Dana. He was also helping my own sister steal from me money my mother had left for my future, money that was supposed to be mine. And the worst part, the part that made my hands curl into fists, was the realization of why Mark had been so calm about money lately. Why he'd suddenly paid off his car loan. Why he'd mentioned, almost too casually, that maybe we should think about moving to a bigger house in a year or two. He hadn't been planning a future with me. He had been planning a future funded by stealing from me. I could have burst through that door right then. I could have screamed, thrown things, demanded answers in the heat of fury. Believe me, every part of my body wanted to do exactly that. But something stopped me. A small, cold voice inside my head that said, if you explode now, they will lie their way out of it. If you stay quiet and gather proof, they will hang themselves with their own words. So instead of bursting in, I did the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. I stayed silent. I listened. And I started recording. My phone was already in my hand. With trembling fingers, I opened the voice recorder app and pressed the red button, careful not to make a sound. I held the phone close to the gap in the sliding door, praying the microphone would pick up enough. For the next several minutes, I stood in my own backyard like a stranger in my own life, listening to my husband and my sister discuss how to keep stealing from me without getting caught. I learned that the lawyer handling our mother's estate, a man named Mr. Whitfield, had actually finalized the inheritance transfer months earlier. Renee had been the one managing the paperwork because I trusted her to handle the boring legal stuff while I focused on grieving. She had quietly redirected my portion into a secondary account, one she had opened specifically for this purpose, with Mark's full knowledge and cooperation. You said this would be done already, Mark whispered. I can't keep stalling her. You don't have to stall her forever, Renee answered. Just until the house sale closes. After that, it won't matter what she finds out. The money will already be somewhere she can't easily trace. A house sale. They were planning to use stolen money to buy property, together. That detail told me everything I needed to know about how deep this betrayal really went. This wasn't a man who had a moment of weakness with another woman. This was a man building an entirely different life behind my back, with my own sister as his partner in it, financed by money that belonged to me. I almost laughed, standing there in the backyard, at how naive I had been. I thought my biggest problem that day was a husband who cheated. I had no idea I was actually married to someone capable of conspiring against me with my own family. When the recording reached almost 11 minutes, I heard footsteps moving away from the door, toward the kitchen. I slipped further into the backyard, behind the hedge near the fence, and waited there, my heart hammering, until I felt steady enough to think clearly. Here is what I decided in those quiet minutes outside my own home. I would not confront them that day. I would not give them the chance to clean up their story, hide the money faster, or turn the situation around to make me look unstable or paranoid. I needed real proof, documents, bank records, anything that could stand up outside of a private conversation. I texted my best friend, Olivia, who happened to work as a paralegal at a law firm downtown. I asked her, as calmly as I could manage through shaking hands, if she knew anyone who specialized in estate disputes and financial fraud between family members. She called me within 2 minutes. Claire, what happened? She asked. I told her everything. The cheating message, the voice in the backyard, the inheritance, the secret account. She went quiet for a moment, and then she said the words that gave me the courage to keep going. You did the right thing staying calm. Now, let's make sure they can't talk their way out of this. That night, I didn't sleep in my bedroom. I told Mark I had a headache and needed the guest room. He didn't argue, in fact, he seemed relieved. I lay awake for hours, replaying the recording in my mind, piecing together a plan instead of a breakdown. By morning, I had a list of 3 things I needed: copies of the will, bank statements showing the transfer, and a private meeting with Mr. Whitfield, the estate lawyer, who I suspected had no idea what Renee had truly done in his name. Section 4. The lawyer's shock. I called Mr. Whitfield's office the next morning and asked for an urgent appointment. When I arrived that afternoon, I brought the recording, saved safely in 3 different places, just in case. Mr. Whitfield was an older man, careful and precise, the kind of lawyer who reads every line twice before signing anything. When I played him a portion of the recording, his expression shifted from professional politeness to genuine alarm. "Mrs. Clare," he said slowly, "the estate documents I filed clearly stated an equal 50-50 split between you and your sister. I personally confirmed both transfers were completed 8 months ago, to 2 separate accounts, each in your individual names." "There's only one account that matters," I said. "Mine never received anything close to what I was owed." He pulled up his records on the spot. What we discovered confirmed my worst fear. Renee had used a notarized but cleverly worded power of attorney document, one I had signed months earlier for a completely different purpose, helping her temporarily manage our mother's medical bills before she passed, and had never properly revoked. She had used that lingering authority to redirect a portion of my inheritance transfer at the very last step before it ever reached my actual account. It wasn't just a lie. It wasn't just a betrayal between sisters. It was, in the eyes of the law, financial fraud, using a legal document for a purpose I never agreed to, without my knowledge or consent. "This is serious," Mr. Whitfield said. "If what's on this recording is accurate, and if the bank records confirm the transfer pattern, you have a very strong case, both for recovering the funds and for pursuing this further if you choose to." I sat in that office chair, staring at the documents in front of me, feeling something strange happen inside my chest. Not just anger anymore. Something steadier. Something that felt like clarity. I had spent 3 days planning to quietly disappear from my marriage with as little conflict as possible. I had spent one evening discovering that disappearing quietly was exactly what they wanted from me, because a woman who leaves quietly doesn't ask questions about missing money. I wasn't going to leave quietly anymore. That night, I went home and acted completely normal. I made dinner. I asked Mark about his day. I let him believe, for just a little longer, that I knew nothing. Every word out of his mouth that evening was a small, careless lie, and every lie made my resolve harder, colder, more certain. Olivia helped me find a second lawyer, one who specialized specifically in family financial disputes, separate from Mr. Whitfield, who would represent the estate's interests but couldn't directly represent me in a dispute against my own sister. Within a week, I had a formal legal strategy in place, a freeze request on the secondary account Renee had opened, a formal demand for the return of the missing funds, and a clear paper trail connecting Mark to full knowledge of the fraud. But the financial fraud was only half the story. There was still the matter of Dana, the woman from those text messages, the affair that had started this entire chain of discovery. I hadn't forgotten about her. I had simply set her aside, because in the grand scheme of betrayal unfolding around me, she was, surprisingly, the smallest piece of the puzzle. Still, I needed to know exactly how deep Mark's double life went, and exactly how long he had been planning a future that didn't include me. So I kept watching. I kept listening. And I kept gathering proof, piece by piece, like building a wall brick by brick, knowing that when it was finally finished, there would be no way for either of them to climb over it. Section 5. 2 Faces, 1 House. The following 2 weeks were some of the strangest of my entire life. I lived inside my own home like an actress playing the role of an unsuspecting wife, while secretly building a case strong enough to take everything from the people who had tried to take from me. I started noticing details I had ignored before. The way Mark would step into another room to take certain phone calls. The way he'd glance at his messages and quickly lock his screen if I walked by. The way Renee suddenly started calling more often, asking sweetly about how I was holding up after our mother's passing, questions that I now understood were really her checking whether I had discovered anything yet. Every conversation became evidence. Every phone call became a piece of the timeline. I started keeping a private journal, dated and detailed, documenting every strange behavior, every odd comment, every moment that lined up with what I had heard that day in the backyard. One evening, I accidentally left my laptop open with the inheritance documents from Mr. Whitfield's office visible on the screen, just for a few seconds, while I walked to the kitchen. I watched Mark's reaction from the hallway mirror. He froze. His eyes scanned the screen. Then he quickly closed the laptop and pretended he hadn't seen anything when I walked back in. That night, he was unusually quiet at dinner. He kept glancing at me like he was trying to read something on my face. I gave him nothing. I smiled, asked if he wanted more rice, and talked about a coworker's birthday party as if my entire world hadn't been rebuilt around a single secret recording. Meanwhile, my lawyer had successfully filed an emergency request to freeze the secondary account Renee controlled, citing clear evidence of unauthorized fund transfers. Banks don't move quickly for ordinary disputes, but financial fraud claims backed by recorded evidence and notarized estate documents move much faster than people expect. Within 10 days, the account was frozen pending investigation. That single action, quiet and legal and completely invisible to Mark and Renee, was the first real domino to fall. The second domino fell almost by accident. Dana, the woman from the original text messages, reached out to me directly. I still don't fully know how she discovered I had found out about everything, but I suspect Mark, in his growing panic over the frozen account, said something careless to her, something that made her realize she was being used as a side piece while he tangled himself in a far bigger scheme with my sister. She sent me a message that read, "I think you deserve to know some things about your husband that go beyond me." We met at a quiet coffee shop on a weekday afternoon. She looked nervous, guilty, but also strangely relieved to finally speak the truth out loud. She told me that Mark had originally told her he was already separated from me, living temporarily in our shared house only for financial reasons until the divorce was finalized. She believed him, at least at first. But over time, small inconsistencies started to bother her. Comments about us regarding plans with me, mentions of family events that clearly involved a wife who was very much still present in his life. When she pushed him for honesty, he admitted the truth. We were still fully married, and he had no real intention of leaving. According to Dana, he told her he needed time because of some financial things that needed to settle first, a phrase that, now, made horrifying sense to both of us. Dana wasn't proud of her role in the affair, and she said so plainly. But she also wasn't willing to be quietly discarded once she realized she had been lied to as thoroughly as I had been. She agreed to provide a written statement confirming the timeline of the affair, which, combined with the financial fraud evidence, painted a complete picture of who my husband truly was. I now had everything I needed: the recording, the bank records, the frozen account, a witness statement from the other woman herself, a lawyer ready to move forward on both the financial fraud case and, if I chose, divorce proceedings that would expose every detail of his betrayal. The only thing left to decide was how and when to bring it all crashing down on both of them at once. I chose a Sunday afternoon, deliberately, because it was the one day Renee always visited for what she called sister time, a tradition that, looking back, I now understood had partly become her way of monitoring how much I knew. I invited her over for lunch, just like always. I told Mark to be home too, claiming I wanted to discuss some decisions about Mom's house, a topic guaranteed to make both of them anxious enough to show up exactly on time, eager to control the conversation before it could control them. What they didn't know was that my lawyer was parked outside, waiting, with copies of every document ready. What they didn't know was that Mr. Whitfield had already been formally notified of the fraud and had begun his own internal review of the estate. What they didn't know was that I had spent 2 weeks turning silent suffering into careful, deliberate strategy. We sat at the same dining table where, 6 years earlier, Mark had proposed to me. Renee sat across from me, smiling that same practiced smile she'd worn for months, while quietly stealing from me. Mark sat at the head of the table, nervously straightening his napkin, clearly bracing for some smaller conversation than the one about to happen. I placed my phone on the table, screen facing up, and pressed play. Their own voices filled the room. Mark and I moved forward with the divorce. With infidelity and financial conspiracy clearly documented, the process moved more smoothly than either of us expected, mostly because he had very little leverage left to fight for anything. He kept apologizing, in that hollow way people do when they're sorry about getting caught rather than sorry about what they did. I stopped listening to those apologies somewhere around the 4th time he offered one. Dana and I never became friends, but we parted on surprisingly civil terms. She later told me she had started seeing a therapist to work through why she had allowed herself to be lied to so completely, and I genuinely hoped she found whatever peace she was looking for. We were both, in our own ways, victims of the same dishonest man. As for me, I sold the same house where I once stood frozen behind a glass door, listening to the people I trusted most plan to deceive me. With my fully recovered inheritance, plus the proceeds from the sale, I bought a small place of my own, simple but entirely mine, with no one else's name on the deed, no shared history haunting the walls. I started a small business about a year later, something my mother had once encouraged me to try before life and marriage and grief pulled me in different directions. Every time I sign a document with only my own name on it, I think about that day in the backyard and how close I came to walking away in silence, taking nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart, never knowing the full truth of what had been stolen from me. Section 8. The Lesson. If there is one thing this entire experience taught me, it's this: silence is not the same as weakness, and patience is not the same as surrender. When I heard that voice in my backyard, every instinct told me to scream, to confront, to demand answers right there in the moment. But the truth doesn't usually come out cleanly when you confront people before you have proof. People who are capable of betraying you once are almost always capable of lying their way out of getting caught, unless you take away their ability to do so. I didn't get justice because I was loud. I got justice because I stayed quiet long enough to gather everything I needed, and then I spoke at exactly the right moment, with proof no one could argue against. Betrayal often comes from the people we trust the most. Not strangers, not distant acquaintances, but spouses and siblings, the people we let closest to our hearts and our lives. That truth is painful to accept. But it also means that protecting yourself sometimes requires a kind of clear-eyed caution, even with the people you love. If you are ever standing where I once stood, frozen, shocked, hearing a truth you never expected, remember that your calmness in that moment can become your greatest weapon. Gather the truth. Protect yourself. And when the time is right, let the truth speak for itself, because nothing exposes betrayal more completely than people's own words, played back to them, in their own voices. I lost a sister and a husband in the same season of my life. But I gained something far more valuable: the certainty that I would never again mistake quiet trust for safety, and the strength to know that even after the deepest betrayal, it is always possible to build something honest, stable, and entirely your own. And that, in the end, is the only kind of life worth packing your bags for. The end.